that dreadful day, Friday the 13th, I'll tell you about a real-life werewolf trial from the late 17th century. I will share the details of his revelations and the court's verdict. And what is more terrible in the eyes of the law, being a werewolf or not going to church. Answer the story of Thiess, the god's old dog. In 1691, the court of Jurgensburg, a city in Swedish Livonia, was faced with a case that could easily have begun with the words, "You won't believe it." The defendant was accused of being a werewolf and descending into hell 3 times a year with his fellow werewolves to battle Satan and his witches. The judges were faced with a paradox. A man supposedly serving goodness formerly appeared to be the ideal defendant. Swedish Livonia was the name given to the territory encompassing modern-day southern Estonia and northern Latvia, which for over a century was part of the Baltic Kingdom Dominium Maris Baltici of the Swedish Empire. This was the region where Lutheranism was introduced after the religious wars that began in 1524 with the Protestant Reformation and lasted until almost the end of the 17th century. However, Swedish Livonia, like northwestern Italy or parts of northern Spain, remained a zone of unstable evangelization. Christianity was brought there as a result of the medieval crusades, so some pre-Christian customs stubbornly survived the religious transition. Old beliefs, it seems, proved far more resilient than many political regimes. Most often, these were fertility cults. They no longer existed in a purely pagan form. Christian beliefs superimposed themselves on old customs, creating a motley mixture. Their adherents sought to protect crops from witches' curses, which, in their view, knew no bounds, or turned to healers to treat illnesses, their own and those of their livestock. Some historians believe that Thiess of Kaltenbrunn, who was already over 70 at the time of his trial, was an echo of the ancient shamanic faith. Little is known about his life. He enters history in 1691, when he appeared before the judges of Jurgensburg, now the small Latvian town of Zau. He claimed to be from Riga and was presumably born around 1621. Biographers, as usual, nervously smoke in the corner. One source, one hero, everything else is a fog. The irony is that Thiess was initially brought to court merely as a possible witness to a theft in a church. The authorities knew rumors of his werewolfism, but didn't take them seriously. They were interested in the thief, not the wolf. But then, Thiess openly admitted to the judges that he had once been a werewolf, but claimed he had ceased being one 10 years ago. Thiess told the judges that 10 years earlier, in 1681, he had already appeared before the court. Then he complained that a farmer from Lemberg had broken his nose. According to his version, it happened none other than hell. He descended there in the guise of a wolf, and the farmer, who, according to Thiess, was a practicing Satanist and sorcerer, hit him in the nose with a broom adorned with horsetails. It's hard not to remember such a weapon of crime. At that time, the judges didn't believe his story and simply threw him out of the courtroom, although one of them honestly confirmed, yes, his nose was indeed broken. But now the judges of Jurgensburg decided to take the matter more seriously and tried to determine whether Thiess was in his right mind or not. They asked several of Thiess's acquaintances present in the courtroom. They replied that, as far as they knew, his common sense had never really deserted him. Moreover, after the 1681 trial, his status in the local community even increased. Apparently, not everyone can boast of an official conflict with a farmer-sorcerer. Thiess claimed that on the night of St. Lucy's Day, as well as usually on the nights of Pentecost and St. John's Day, he and other werewolves transformed from men into wolves. When asked how exactly this happened, he initially claimed they donned wolf skins. He claimed he'd bought his from a farmer in Marienburg, but had already sold it several years before the trial. When the judges asked for the names of the seller and buyer, Thiess abruptly amended his story. It turned out he and the other werewolves simply went into the bushes, undressed, and transformed into wolves there. Apparently, wearing a skin wasn't necessary. Afterwards, he recounted how they roamed the surrounding farms, tearing apart every domestic animal they came across, then roasting the meat and eating it. When the judges asked how wolves could roast meat, Thiess calmly replied that they were already human at that point and, what's more, loved to salt their food. However, they never had bread. Thiess told an even more original story. According to him, many years ago, a man raised a toast, blew 3 times into a mug of beer, and declared, "You'll be like me." Then he gave Thiess a drink and explained that if he ever wanted to cure his lycanthropy, he'd need to do the same to someone else. Simply put, your subscription doesn't end until you find a new user. After this, according to Thiess, the wolves went to a place beyond the sea. It sounds mysterious, but in reality it turned out to be a swamp near Lemberg, just half a mile from the court president's estate. Lucky, nothing more. It was there, through this swamp, that they entered the underworld and engaged in battle with the devil and his loyal wicked witches, chasing them like dogs with long iron rods. Furthermore, Thiess told the judges with complete seriousness that werewolves cannot tolerate the devil, and that they were God's dogs. It seemed that while ordinary Christians prayed in church, these dogs were staging unscheduled raids of justice in hell. According to the old man, the werewolf's bad reputation was simply the result of slander from the devil, a classic example of slandering our family. The judges from Jurgensburg were perplexed and quite reasonably asked Thiess why werewolves went to hell at all if they hated the devil so much. Thiess replied that he and his fellow werewolves had to go on this official mission to recover livestock, grain, and the fruits of the earth stolen by witches. If they failed, he reasoned, the harvest this year would be poor. Thiess recounted how last year he had gone to hell as a werewolf and carried back to earth as much barley, oats, and rye as he could carry, ensuring a bountiful harvest. At this point, the judges suddenly turned their attention to logic and noticed a contradiction. Thiess had previously claimed to have stopped being a werewolf 10 years ago, but now he admitted to running through hell as a wolf just a year earlier. Under pressure, he admitted he had lied. They were still willing to tolerate stories about hell, but not inconsistencies in deadlines. Bureaucracy, what can you do? After listening to his tales of nocturnal voyages into the underworld, the judges suspected something was wrong with the exemplary Lutheran before them, and asked whether he attended church, listened to the word of God, prayed, and received communion. Thiess frankly replied that he did none of these things, explaining that he was too old to understand all of this. Old age, in his view, justified not only his forgetfulness but also his religious schedule. It was later revealed that, in addition to his captivating tales of his journeys to hell, Thiess practiced folk magic for the locals, acting as a healer and exorcist. He blessed grain and horses, and knew charms against wolves and for stopping bleeding. One such charm involved adding blessed salt to warm beer and chanting, "Sun and moon, go over the sea, bring back the soul the devil has carried off to hell, and restore the life and health of the cattle they have been deprived of." However, the power of God was not mentioned at all in the charm. Beer, salt, heavenly bodies, everyone was involved except the Almighty. The judges deemed this blessing criminal, believing it was leading people away from Christianity, and ultimately sentenced Thiess to flogging and exile for life. For a man who, in his own words, was saving the harvest of an entire region, the outcome was, to put it mildly, ungrateful.